Welcome back to Sahara TV for a country focus segment where we focus a spotlight on an African country. Today's country focus is Mali, where a crisis following a coup earlier this year has created a power vacuum in the country. The Malian army seized power in March, but rebel groups in the north of the country have been able to gain a foothold. With the help of ECOWAS, an interim civilian president was selected. However, the situation in Mali remains precarious. Observers have called the situation in Mali the worst crisis since the landlocked country gained independence in 1960. Making headlines now is the threat of Islamist rebel group Ansar Dine, who have threatened to destroy the historical tombs in the ancient city of Timbuktu. What is the way forward for Mali? Speaking with me today is Alex Thurston. Alex is a PhD candidate in religion at Northwestern University, studying the role of Islam in politics in Africa. His blog, Sahel Blog, focuses on politics and religion in the Sahel and the Horn of Africa. Alex can be found at Sahel Blog on Twitter. Welcome to the program, Alex.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Okay, so like I said, Mali has been sort of the, not beacon, but it's been a relatively stable country, at least so we thought, since 1960. I mean, how did Mali go from a relatively stable democracy to the situation that it's in now, facing coups and rebel threats?
Well, I think that to a certain extent the stability was maybe not an illusion, but was more superficial than people had thought. It turned out, that under President Amadou Toumani Touré, that there were a lot of issues with corruption. There were development efforts that he had promised in the north that didn't materialize or didn't proceed as seriously as people in the north wanted. And then you have, long-standing grievances among the Tuareg population in the north. And so that combined to launch the rebellion in January. And as the Malian military ran into difficulties against the rebels in the north, then that precipitated the coup in the south.
Mm-hmm. So how did we miss it? How were we not able to see some of the signs of the underlying cracks in Malian democracy? Was it the fault of the media? Was it a fault of a lack of understanding? Or how did we miss this?
I think that Mali, Mali had a great reputation. I mean, I think it had a great reputation because of relatively smooth transfers of power since it returned to democracy in 1992. Mali is, it attracted a lot of tourism and so forth. And so I think that, people just got a really good impression. I think people also got a good impression of Touré. And I think that led people to overlook some of the problems of corruption and with discontent in the north.
Mm-hmm. So in a sense of nostalgia for the leaders of the past, for its culture, for even tourism perhaps kind of helped to mask some of the problems.
Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm. And so can you sort of explain the rebels, like who the rebel groups are and what is it that they're agitating for? What is it that they want?
So, northern Mali is ethnically diverse. There are different groups there, but the main rebel groups have been led by Tuaregs. And Tuaregs, since colonial times have felt marginalized by governments that are based in the south. And, there have been multiple Tuareg-led rebellions before in the north. So the rebellion was launched, I should say, by a group called the National Movement for the Liberation of the Azawad. And the Azawad for them refers to the three northern regions of Mali, Kidal, Gao, and Timbuktu. Mm-hmm. So the MNLA, as the French version of their name is abbreviated, the MNLA launched the rebellion in January. Their goal is independence for this territory that they call the Azawad. And the MNLA was sort of leading the rebellion, at least through March or April. And they were able to sort of drive out the National Malian Army. Fighting alongside the MNLA is Ansar Dine, who you mentioned before. Ansar Dine also has a Tuareg leader, but their goal is more to impose their version of Islamic law or Sharia across all of Mali. So whereas the MNLA is interested in independence for the north, and the MNLA says that they have sort of a agenda. Ansar Din has this Islamist agenda. It's not necessarily just restricted to the north. Those are the two main groups, and Ansar Din has sort of outmaneuvered the MNLA in various ways at this point. Alongside them are all kinds of different smaller groups. Some of them ethnic-based, some of them other Islamist actors in sort of a coalition with Ansar Din, and then potentially some militias that are still partly loyal to the Malian government.
So you mentioned again Ansar Din, and Ansar Din seems to be capturing the headlines, especially in the last few months. Can you tell us just a little more about who they are? You mentioned again that they are wanting to impose a certain strict interpretation of Islamic law on the country. Who are they? Where are they getting their power base from? And again, they're agitating for?
So Ansar Din's leader is a man named Iyad al-Ghali, who did a career. He was a participant in some of the former rebellions. He lived in Saudi Arabia for a time, and seems to have had a sort of a religious conversion there, to a more strict version of Islam. Some people have depicted him as sort of just a complete opportunist, and that he's sort of riding what he sees as the most promising sort of current at the time. And some people take his conversion, as more genuine. So he's put together sort of this coalition of people who, for whatever reason, out of genuine belief or out of political calculation, have embraced this stricter version of Islam. There seem to be not too clear lines between MNLA and Ansar Din, and so it seemed for a while that they were, part of the same coalition. They tried to work out various agreements, but those all seem to have fallen apart. So Ansar Din includes Tuaregs. It also seems to include Arabs and maybe members of other groups, other ethnic groups. Ansar Din is also sort of in a coalition with Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, which is sort of the Al-Qaeda franchise that's been operating in Algeria and in parts of the Sahel sort of 2007 or before. And then there's also an AQIM splinter group called the Movement for Unity and Jihad in West Africa, or Mujwa. So those are sort of, AQIM, Mujwa, and Ansar Din sort of have this Islamist coalition.
Yeah. So basically, it's a very complex makeup as far as the rebel movements. As far as Ansar Din, one thing that's been sort of frightening the entire world has been their vow to destroy tombs or shrines in Timbuktu that they deem to be against Islamic rule for constructing. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and why they're doing this?
Right. So, in their understanding, they're trying to cultivate as strict of a monotheistic approach as they can, and so they're concerned with the idea of saints and with visits to the saints' tombs or what they see as worshiping saints. They view that as polytheism, and it's something that goes against sort of the core of Islam as they see it. So they, the analogy that they've made is between Timbuktu and Mecca. When the Prophet Muhammad and early Muslim community reconquered Mecca, the Prophet ordered the destruction of pagan idols that were in Mecca. So Ansar Din has made that sort of analogy, and that's what we're doing in Timbuktu. We're destroying these pagan idols. Of course, the Muslims on the other side of the divide would say, well, we're not pagans, we're Muslims. These are the tombs of Muslim leaders and Muslim saints, people of exceptional spiritual character. This isn't polytheism. This is veneration for great leaders. Right.
And what's the scale? I mean, as if anybody who studied Africa or anyone who studied, especially the kingdoms of West Africa, know that Timbuktu was a great learning center for not just African scholars and elites way back hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but for all of the Muslim world. I mean, what is the significance of Timbuktu and its cultural heritage now facing a threat from Ansar Dine?
I mean, I think I think that the destruction of tombs and the other sort of violations that have taken place there. I mean, I think it's a loss for the world Islamic community, and it's a loss for the world in general. I mean, some of these places are heritage sites designated by UNESCO. There are libraries and precious manuscripts that are in danger. People here, the scholarly community here in the States and in other places has raised a real alarm about the fate of extremely precious sites and documents.
But is anything being done? Is there any sort of real concerted effort to try to figure out a way to create some sort of barricade or some sort of barrier or human line to just prevent these ancient historical sites from being damaged?
There have been reports of protests by local citizens against Ansar Dine, but the situation is so so violent and chaotic and unstable that at least I haven't heard of any sort of systematic effort to try and protect the shrines or the documents.
And as we know, UNESCO declared Timbuktu a World Heritage Site in danger, and I believe after they gave that declaration, then Ansar Dine continued to destroy more sites, if I'm correct.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think through the present they're destroying sites.
And so moving back to, we talked a little bit about the sort of regional implications, or at least, the regional implications for what's going on with in Mali. A lot of our audience is from Nigeria, and Nigeria is facing an insecurity crisis with Boko Haram. I'm sure a lot of people would like to know, is Boko Haram and Ansar Dine or any of these groups, is there any sort of link between what's happening in both of these countries?
Well, there's been a lot of talk over the past year about possible connections between Boko Haram and AQIM in particular. There have definitely been rhetorical links between the two groups. They definitely referred to each other. Some people, some analysts believe that there's sort of extensive cooperation between AQIM and Boko Haram, and that the kind of attacks that Boko Haram has conducted in Nigeria would not have been possible unless they had some kind of outside expertise or training from AQIM. I'm a little bit more skeptical personally that there are sort of deep operational linkages between the two groups.
And why is that?
The situation seems to be very murky. Why am I skeptical?
Yeah, right. Why are you skeptical?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think Boko Haram has some of the kinds of attacks that they've conducted have been on a more serious level than attacks that AQIM has conducted recently. And I think also, the idea that the expertise to conduct bomb attacks, to coordinate real military assaults, that expertise isn't found in Nigeria. I just don't. I mean, Nigeria is a country of, an estimated million people. I mean, there are people in Nigeria who know how to make bombs and how to, conduct attacks and so forth. So I'm not convinced by the sort of circumstantial argument that the expertise necessarily has to come from the outside. I also think that there are a lot of sort of logistical barriers. I mean, Mali is, it's a fair distance from Mali to Nigeria, especially from northern Mali to Nigeria. And then I guess I should say, I just haven't seen the evidence yet that's convinced me.
Sure.
So I'm not saying it's not possible, but I think, so far I haven't seen anything that would indicate more than these rhetorical ties and maybe occasional operational ties, but not some kind of sustained cooperation. But it is possible.
Not like a systemic sort of, that there's some sort of cooperation, or at least a sort of decisively that these groups are working together. As far as, again, back to the regional insecurity part of the question, has the situation in Libya influenced what's happening in has the rebel situation after the fall of Gaddafi, has that influenced rebels contributing to what's happening in Mali? Are the weapons flows connected at all to what's happened in Libya?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a connection. I mean, it's hard to parse out because it's hard to know what would have happened if Gaddafi's side had won in Libya or if Gaddafi was still alive. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that we can draw a straight line and say because Gaddafi fell, you get this rebellion in Mali. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I mean, I do think the situation in Libya contributed in several ways. I mean, first of all, it before even the Tuareg uprising in Niger and Mali was partly resolved by the efforts of Gaddafi as a mediator. I mean, he has, he had ties to these Tuareg communities, and he had some clout. And that's certainly, he's not on the scene. So that's potentially, I mean, he could have played the role of peacemaker. I mean, his role among the Tuareg was complicated. Sometimes he was an instigator, sometimes he was a peacemaker. So I don't want to make him out to be, I don't want to say that his legacy there is complicated. Mm-hmm. The second thing is that during the civil war, in Libya, he activated some of his contacts among Tuaregs. Mm-hmm. Tuaregs who were living inside Libya, Tuaregs who were living in Mali. He recruited some of those people to fight for his side. Mm-hmm. When that side lost, some of those people went back to Mali. Some of them joined the MNLA. Mm-hmm. And so you definitely get, I think, some kind of effect there. Sure. And then lastly, like you mentioned, there's the issue of weapons, sure. Which have flowed from Libya into various places, including Mali. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, so let's kind of switch to what are the potential responses or at least the responsibilities of the international community to respond to the crisis. Now, back to the destruction of, or the threat of destruction to the tombs at Timbuktu. UNESCO, again, declaring that this is a World Heritage Site in danger. Does that put any sort of obligation on perhaps neighboring countries to supply support to help protect some of these tombs?
I mean, the neighboring countries, in the form of ECOWAS, which you mentioned earlier, I mean, they're extremely concerned with the situation in northern Mali in general. And ECOWAS has talked, for months now about mounting some kind of intervention. Mm-hmm. ECOWAS has everybody's facing the challenge of dealing with these twin interlocking crises in Mali. And a lot of people feel there's not going to be any resolution or let alone a reconquest of the north until there's more political clarity and stability in the south. Mm-hmm. So, ECOWAS faces the challenge of trying to, sort out who's in control in the south and put pressure on the soldiers basically to allow for a genuine civilian transition. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so ECOWAS has talked about mounting an armed intervention in the north. France and the U.S. France has made sort of more supportive comments. The U.S. has made more cautious comments.
So more so just rhetoric. I mean, it's more so just comments. And I read also in your blog, you had a blog post talking about the intervention options in Mali. Yeah. And you do think that there will be some sort of intervention, but the manner and perhaps where the support will be coming from is perhaps still unclear. And from what we understand here, the ECOWAS is sort of losing patience, is what you said in your blog, losing patience with the Malian government, and is threatening to withdraw the recognition of the Malian government if Mali can't get its act together, basically, and send troops.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So no, they're really pushing. I mean, ECOWAS was able to push for the soldiers who mounted the coup in March to hand over power to an interim civilian government. Mm-hmm. But it looks more and more like that civilian government it looks more like the soldiers still wield a lot of influence, and that the civilian government just isn't very effective, mm-hmm. Including at dealing with the crisis in the north.
Right.
So sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead. Continue.
No, I was going to say, Yeah, like you said, I do think there will be an intervention at some point, but the logistical challenges are huge. I mean, the force that ECOWAS has talked about activating has, maybe 3,300 troops at most, which
Or
I
3,000.
think to most people just sounds too small
Right.
for the task of, yeah.
It's 3,000 troops that ECOWAS wants to commit.
Yeah, and the Malian government talks about how it has about 4,000 troops who would be ready to retake the north. I mean, if you had a force of 7,000, I think that would start to look more significant. But even that, still might be too few.
Okay. And so to sort of round up the discussion, I mean, a lot of the crisis in Mali, a lot of people will say, okay, African solutions to African problems. In your opinion, do you think an ECOWAS intervention would be the best route? Do you see that as even feasible, or is it more likely going to come, and that is if it comes, from the outside, from the UN, from potentially France, with maybe the support of the US? Where do you see action happening?
I think an ECOWAS-led force is the most likely outcome, and maybe really the only possibility on the table. France has definitely said that they want ECOWAS to take the lead. The United States has been even more cautious, and they've said, that they want ECOWAS to take the lead, and that they don't even feel that it's a good idea. That was what Assistant Secretary of State Johnny Carson said in late June. So I don't think that there would be an outside intervention that didn't substantially involve ECOWAS.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens with that, and we'll be tracking this story very closely. And with that, we have to round up for this segment. Again, that was Alex Thurston, and he is a PhD candidate at Northwestern University studying Islam and politics in Africa and in the Sahel in particular. Alex, thanks so much for coming on the show to talk with me today.
Thank you.
And with that, we're going to round up. Stay tuned with Sahara TV. I'm Karen Attia.